Welcome back to DIFF Live Talks. We're really happy to have you all here. We would have loved to welcome you here in Dharamsala, seen the films on the big screen, had conversations afterwards. But yet we're thrilled that all of you are here with us. I know we have a large audience today. I know you're all over the world. And so we're thrilled that this is possible. Uh,
It's my great pleasure to welcome our guest tonight, Chaitanya Tamhane, one of India's rising young stars in the filmmaking world. Welcome, Chaitanya. Great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hello, hello. It's a pleasure for me. Thank you for inviting me for this chat.
Not at all. Now, before we start the session, I've been asked to give a few pointers to the audience. So we encourage all of you to type in your questions. You'll notice a Q&A tab in the bottom corner of your screen. Please type your questions there as we will only be taking typed questions. You can keep sending them throughout the conversation. We've set aside the last 15 to 20 minutes of this session for Q&As. Audiences can also upvote questions, which is a like button on the Q&A tab. That will be helpful to prioritize the questions in case we run short of time. Also, do check if someone else has already asked the question. Thank you. And now we can start.
Chaitanya, we would have loved to have invited you here, as you know, but you did. We had the great pleasure of meeting you and Vivek Gomber, your producer here, 6 years ago with The Court. And actually at that time, DIFF didn't accept submissions. So the way we found the film was really strange. Somebody on Facebook, I think one of your team members just posted that you had finished the film. And I sent them a message saying, what is this film? Can you send it to us? And the screener came next day. Right. I think it was before, maybe before you had even been accepted in Venice. There was no talk about that. And this film came and we watched it and we were just like amazed. And when we are watching and looking at films through the year, we always look for this wonderful film to come to us. And it came in the most unusual way. So it's a pleasure to have had you here. And how was your experience in Dharamsala?
Right. No, it was amazing. As you know, it's definitely one of my favorite film festivals in the world, even though I've been there only once. But I remember we had such a crazy time. Watching great films in such a cozy environment, in such a friendly environment, the weather. And yeah, I remember like partying and fooling around and just, going crazy till like, 4 a.m., 5 a.m. every night. It was a crazy time, it was as crazy as it was pleasant and soothing. So yeah, I would have loved to come this year, as you know. And I'm sure everybody who's attending, this session and attending the festival would have loved for the physical festival to happen. But well, this is that year where we can't do anything about it.
Exactly. So just going, straight into your films, both Court and The Disciple, which we are very fortunate to have been able to see, and it's a beautiful film. Both the films slow time down. They are kind of very meditative, and they allow this inner story to emerge kind of very patiently. Can you talk a little bit about your approach and your thought process in your filmmaking?
Right. Well, the thing is, when I'm writing the films, on a script level, I don't think you kind of get an exact idea of the pacing of the film. It's something you end up finding on set and then on the edit, and of course your sound design also shapes the perception of time. And yes, it's one thing that I do have an affinity towards a certain kind of pacing. It's a personal preference of sorts. But I think it's also something both the films in a way kind of demanded. But like if you look at The Disciple, the pacing of that film is much more dynamic, compared to Court, even though both are on the quieter side. But I don't think this is something that I planned for. It's a very instinctive thing when you're on the edit, when you're watching individual pieces till they all become a whole. you kind of try to find the in point and the out point, and then you see how the whole piece is working. And yeah, I guess both the films, I kind of, every time we tried to rush something, or every time we tried to cut early, or we tried to, change the pace, it just like didn't work for me. I wanted it to be a certain pace. And it's very tricky because even as a director, when I'm watching the same film, certain previews, I'm like, oh, this is such a drag. This is just like, so slow, and so like, I don't know what I'm doing. Maybe it's too loose. And then the same cut on a different day, and you're like, wow, that went by so quickly, you know. So I remember till the very last minute, till I was like mixing the film, I was, doing minor changes in the edit, because it becomes very delicate and very fragile, and it also depends on your state of mind. I believe that the screening of a film is like the performance of a play, where every time the performance is different. Where we ask, like, if you're going for theater, how was the show today? I feel the same about a film screening, even though it's the same film. It doesn't have the kind of variables that a play has. But yeah, so it's something you're negotiating and kind of gauging, throughout your edit. And then, okay, maybe you decide a certain pacing in the edit, and you go for the sound design, and you feel like, oh shit, everything's sped up because now it's so full.
Right. Right.
And then it becomes about your intent as to how you want to shape time, how you want to manipulate the notion of how, the pace of how things are happening in the film. But yeah, again, I would say in The Disciple, I feel it's just a lot more dynamic because there are lots of different moving parts. But again, that's been used, to kind of do justice to the narrative. Whereas in Court, the answer is rather simple because it is about time, in the courtrooms many times. So that had a different pacing. Also, last point, I think our perception of time is also now being guided by the pacing we are seeing in other films. Our times have become so frantic that something that you would have called, conventionally paced, or you would have said, okay, it's now suddenly feels very slow because our attention spans have reduced so much. You know what I mean? So there's all of that.
Right. And I guess since you also edit your own films, right? It must sometimes get tricky to, kind of sort of understand the pacing of the film, because you get so caught up with the edit process. I mean, I know Ritu and I, we kind of edit our own films as well.
No,
Do
not
you,
always.
not always, but as well, I would say. But do you, how do you negotiate that then? When you feel like you're kind of losing sight of the pacing, for instance.
Right. Yeah, this is a tricky thing to answer, because The Disciple is the first film that I've officially edited myself. I've always been very closely involved in the edits of, all my films. But The Disciple was, again, so this is thanks to Alfonso that I edited the film, because I was actually looking for an editor. I was worried that, okay, I'm going to lose objectivity. I have written it, I have shot it. Now, I don't know if I'll lose objectivity. And it wasn't working out with any of the editors I had met or I kind of started working with. And I was looking for a consulting editor. And I was talking to Kwaran about it. And he was like, you know what? This is a tantrum. This is not a problem. Edit it yourself. No one's going to know this better than you. You're the only person who will have the answers to this. So do it yourself. And I was nervous about like officially committing to it, because then you have to like really like sit on your ass, do the dirty work and not just go into the edit room and give your opinion. So yeah, and so that was a real concern about losing objectivity. But I don't think that really happened, because I'm not like, the kind of person who's in love with his own material. I'm not the kind of person who's in love with my shots. In fact, I'm always super critical of what's happening. But yeah, the tricky part is for me negotiating the fine tuning of the cuts and of the edit, and also keeping track of the bigger picture. So for example, even in a rough cut, for me, I can't watch it with bad cuts. Like I can't tolerate it. Like I would leave the room if there are like bad cuts in the rough cut. For example, there are certain choices, certain edit choices where I need Foley on the editing stage for me to make sense of the cut, because it's a disruptive experience. I need sound design in certain specific cases for the cuts to work. If the cuts are not working now, I can't be like, oh, this will work later, let me put up with it. I'm very, very finicky about those things. Very finicky. There can't be a single source of light in the room when we are watching the preview, or there can't be like lights from the keyboard. We can't have people come in. Yeah, there are many things I'm very finicky and particular about. So similarly with the edit, like, I mean, I'm editing in frames. Again, this is something I picked up from Alfonso. I saw him like on the edit of Roma, and he was like, I mean, he's a superhuman. He was like, okay, take out 8 frames from here, take out 6 frames from here. And I was like, wait, what? This is crazy. So, but then once I was kind of introduced to that concept, I just ran with it, So it's that fine tuning, but at the same time, you're also trying to keep in mind whether the film is working as a whole, which when you have a 2-hour piece does become difficult. But so then I do have a solution for that. Your team members, like your associate editor, your assistant, doesn't really help because they like everything that's happening because they're too attached. Is this okay? Yeah. Is this okay? Yeah. Yeah. But so I do a lot of screenings for people I trust. It's always one person at a time. But people who are not even like from the film industry or whatever, just my friends, people I trust, people who I know will be kind and will be constructive. And then it's like being a detective, you're like, okay, so what's not working? Sometimes their diagnosis is correct, but the symptom they are mentioning is not right, but like, okay, so what's happening? Okay, so this is happening. So you kind of start shaping things, but yeah, there are extreme highs and extreme lows. There are days when you're like, this is totally, completely screwed and this is a mess. And then there are days when you're unhealthily in love with your cut and you're like, wow, it's working. And then next day, it's not working at all. And then you edit out like 3 seconds and then it's all amazing again. So yeah, so it's that.
How
But yeah,
long did this take? How long did it all take? This edit, how long did it take?
It took me about 5 months, 5 to 6 months, maybe 5 months. Yeah. Because again, the kind of film language that I employ, it's a lot about choosing the right takes and shaping the performances. So, and it's a bit of a Rube Goldberg effect, because there's one nice take, there's a wide shot, there are 4 or 5 players and everything's going fine. And suddenly one person, one actor messes up, or one unnecessary movement happens and you're like, okay, not this one. It has to be something else. And then sometimes you select takes more for the structure, and then you realize, okay, but the performance is weak, so now let's select something. So it's not so much about assembling things out of coverage. For me, it's more like just choosing the right take. And sometimes there isn't the right take. So you have like the 3 kind of okay takes, and then you watch them again and you watch them again. And okay, now this one seems like the most okay out of them all. Let's place that. But okay, so this is still a problem. Okay, now can I fix it in VFX? Okay, now can I fix it in sound? And then it kind of starts. I've done that a lot in The Disciple, especially because again, it's something I picked up on the sets of Roma. For those who don't know, I was a fly on the wall on the sets of Roma during the post-production and shooting and all of that. And I was in a mentorship program with Alfonso Cuaron, and I learned a lot of things in those 2 years. So there were times when I'm like, okay, this is the best shot for the audience. This is a very good shot, but it's too static. I'm not liking it. I'm not liking the rhythm of it. So what do? You take another take, you stitch out someone's movement and you place it in this shot where the performance of the reactions is correct. So I've started doing those kind of things. Okay, this is the best take in terms of movement, but the protagonist is blinking too much, which is why this take is not working. Expensive solution, if that is your best take, but your performer is blinking too much, let's fix the blink in VFX, So you
Tenzing and I were talking about this after seeing Disciple. We were like, you mentioned there's a lot of VFX, but where are the VFX?
Yeah, you won't see it.
Could you talk about this a bit more?
The obvious kinds of VFX.
It's very subtle, very devious. And used for different things, but I had a complete ball doing that, and that really expands your vocabulary and what is possible.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, some people might say that that's kind of not the purist's approach to filmmaking, right? That you're kind of dabbling with within a shot and making like taking out blinks and things like that. But obviously, you had no problem with doing that.
I mean, look, I come from a background of magic. Like I started doing magic before I started making films, and the effect matters. The method doesn't matter to the audience. I mean, we decided this before the talk that there will be people more from a film background here. So let's talk about what happens. And everything in cinema is manipulation. I mean, if you really were a purist, you wouldn't light the location, you wouldn't do a lock off, you wouldn't have junior artists. So I mean, everything is a manipulation. It's about what's possible and what's not possible and what is the effect that it's creating.
Mhm. That's
You
true.
know what I mean?
I guess like the dogma people tried to do it totally naturally, but then they also gave up at some point and started making films.
It's very simple. It's like whatever works.
Yeah.
Whatever works, basically. And as long as you can't sense the methodology, I mean, most filmmakers won't even talk about this kind of stuff. Like there are tricks that people employ, and then they talk about it like 3 years, 5 years down the line.
Right.
But here it's also more like sharing the process, and also what maybe if there are some film students or whatever, they could learn also and get some ideas. Because my point is, okay, maybe you don't get to do this in 100 shots of your film because you don't have the budget. Maybe you want to do it for that one shot which makes all the difference in your film, but at least that can be done.
Right.
So again,
Why
I'll tell you how this happened. Basically, again, on the sets of Roma, there was a scene where there's a young boy, I think his name is Paco in the film. And, it's tricky with kids to get good performances. And it was a great take, except he looked in the camera once, okay? And there was the VFX supervisor next to Alfonso, and he's like, can we fix that? Can we fix his eyes? And he was like, yeah, we can. And I was just blown away, because coming from an independent background, these things are not
Right.
in your vocabulary. So I was like, wait, what? And then once you pick up on these things, and once you start, and also we had a great VFX artist. She's a freelancer from London. Her name is Bas. She was great. She's done stuff which was just amazing to us. We were like, this is like magic. How has she done this? But again, even within that, we drove her crazy. I drove her completely crazy to the brink of a nervous breakdown, because you want the details to be convincing enough.
Yeah.
So that it really, really works. But yeah.
How many VFX shots did you have in there?
That's like
the answer is 20. 20 shots that don't have VFX in the entire film.
Really? My God.
Yeah, but it's mostly very subtle, and that's not the point. The method is not the point. The point is,
I get it.
but I'm also that kind of a control freak who
right.
I mean, I can't, sleep peacefully till I have everything to my liking, which is not possible. But yeah. But I mean, like, I'll give you another example, what I mean, and you'll understand how this is creatively motivated, because you can't see any. I'm not making like, Avengers or whatever superhero film. So, okay, so there's a yoga scene in the film where there's a yoga instructor, and there's a soundtrack playing, oh, okay, and the yoga teacher is talking in a certain pace, which I decided on set that this is the pace I want. And he's like, okay, listen to your body, now listen to your mind. Now I go on the edit, and I'm like, now that I have the actual Om track, because we use the temp, now that I have this music for which I have the rights, his spacing of the dialogues is not correct, and I'm not going to be able to sleep peacefully if this scene doesn't work for me the way I want it to work. So what do? I shouldn't actually be giving away all of these things, especially if you haven't seen the film. Okay, this is stupid, but anyway, we are amongst friends here. So I basically replaced his head from another shot or whatever, which had a different pace, and then we made his mouth move when we wanted it to move, because it's kind of from the back. But that's how you get what you want. But the idea here is much richer than showing off that I used VFX for
Yeah.
and wasted the producer's money for things that don't need VFX. The idea is that as long as you have the vision or a certain intent, I think it's worth trying for and fighting for it. And you need to know certain tools, to be able to use them. And you have to understand, for me, who is not from like a typical film background or from a film school, these are new, amazing tools and devices and secrets, because I'll tell you what, in court, for example, while making court, I constantly felt a lot of frustration. And I felt like, okay, I'm like an orchestra conductor who has the music in his head, but the players are somehow not being able to translate it, so I felt a lot less of that with the Disciple, for sure. Of course, it costs a lot more money, and
Right.
it kind of also, the credibility of having made Court helps a little bit for people to trust you and for your producer to trust you. But I felt a lot less of that with the Disciple. And then what happens is, then everything that goes wrong, you can't blame anybody else. It's all on you. So it's a different kind of suffering.
Right.
They're suffering in many ways, right? Making films.
Yeah, I love that quote. Somebody said this, and I've never forgotten this quote. I have it in my Evernote diary. Who said it? It's like, filmmaking is a lifelong career in heartbreak. So I'm like, this is so true. I'm never forgetting that.
But Chaitanya, talking about purity, I mean, you said, that the kind of purity we were talking about just in the process is not important. But in your film, like in a sense, the film is about a kind of purity of, what art should strive for. I mean, it's about a kind of real question of purity and, art. And so could you talk about that? Because I think that's very
Sure. The one thing which is kind of, I guess, misunderstood by some viewers and even some critics, not that I read reviews, but maybe sometimes I browse through just the highlights, or from what I hear, the one misconception or misunderstanding is, just because the main protagonist of the film has certain beliefs, that's the belief of the filmmaker. Because sometimes what you're trying to explore could be done from the perspective of something very extreme, but that may not be your standpoint. So I personally I don't come from a tradition. I was not born into any kind of a tradition. So in that sense, the conversation that's happening in the film, or the kind of problems that Sharad is facing in the film, I don't have. I'm a millennial kid. I had a computer from the age of 14. I am super geeky, and I am into like virtual reality and video games and board games and escape rooms and high-tech escape rooms. Like I said, I'll do whatever it takes for the effect and whatever makes sense to me. In fact, I'm working on certain ideas that will not be traditional or purist pleasing at all. But at the same time, yes, I do relate to Sharad's struggle in the way that I find our times to be a bit too postmodern, where there are no isms, where nothing kind of really matters anymore. This post-truth kind of an era, with so much happening, so much, we are overstimulated, and with
Much
such
nonsense also
attention
floating around.
spans, and I might be sounding like a whiny old soul, but I do feel that. I do feel a certain corrosion of history. I do feel it's just purely because of there's so much noise now,
Yeah.
and it's a tricky generation I was born in. I guess one generation before me, or like a couple of generations before me, are more sorted, and the generation after me, who directly was born into the world of the internet and social media, is kind of still has their footing. My generation, I'm 33, I was born in 87, is a slightly tricky generation, where we got to see a little bit of the pre-internet old world and the new world. And and there are people who scoff at me, like, oh, come on, you're too much into the internet, you're talking too much about, well, the internet's shaping the face of the world right now. That's how elections are being won. That's how people are consuming news and information. and it's kind of led to a different kind of democracy where everybody has a voice, which could be a great thing, but maybe not always, and it's really also rewiring our sort of, neural activity in our brain, because we have started behaving like the cursor that we have on our laptops or phones. We're like from here to here to here. And I'm sure not everybody is tuned into that frequency and not everybody is facing that problem, but I can't imagine my generation not facing that, and just the kind of anxiety, it develops. And now, because of the pandemic, all of those problems have been accelerated 10 times, I feel. Because now you have no option but to be on Zoom.
Right.
Anyway, I know we've gone in a different direction, but anyway.
No, that's really interesting, because as you say, you're from this generation that grew up in this kind of hyper speeded up kind of, information overload, where people's attention spans are no longer than, say, like a TikTok video. But your films are something else, because they're kind of films that require you to slow down, require like a lot of patience, a lot of attention. So do you expect your audience, especially audiences from your generation, to allow you that, sort of luxury of kind of communicating in that way with them?
Right. This is a complicated question to answer. The thing is, I personally, in my real life, like when I'm not working persona, I have like ADD. Okay. So I am all over the place. I can't sit still in one place. Okay. I'm constantly finding ways to distract myself. And I'm an expert at that. I mean, if you look at my YouTube watch history or what I do at home, how I spend my day, you'll be really surprised. What you would expect. So I'm quite naughty that way and quite energetic that way. But yeah, when it comes to my work and the films that I've made so far, it's a different part of my brain that I access. Not like, oh, I become pretentious and I'm like, okay, now, but it's just, and when it comes to that, it's an instinct that I have that I can't help. So even if you told me that, Chaitanya, this is going to be more appealing to people if you make it this way, or if you change the language of the film, I can't get myself to do it, because that's who I am and that's how I find my answers. That's who, who I become, and that's the instinct I have about, like, so for example, even like where to cut a scene or where to cut a shot, or what kind of a sound design works for you, or on set, where do you say, cut, and when do you say so. These are very bodily, instinctive things. I can't help it. That's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is, it's a totally different experience watching films on the big screen in a theater with, or even like a good home theater where the lights are off, where people pay respect to the film they're watching, as opposed to watching it on your mobile phone or laptop with your phone ringing and the doorbell ringing and you're doing 50 other things. Again, now this might be a very old-fashioned perspective or a very romantic perspective with no relevance to the current world. Cinema was supposed to be an illusion. Okay, it is supposed to be an oniric medium where you go into a hall, the lights go out, the screen lights up. Okay, and it's kind of a ritual. It's a communal ritual. It's kind of a pact you make, and then your attention span is very different. Your commitment to that experience of being immersed is very different, and it's also kind of a prerequisite for that illusion to work. I mean, recently I read something very sort of meaningful and pertinent by Ritu, who said that, at home you're watching films, you're not experiencing films. And that's the big difference. So I think the disciple and code wouldn't be that big an issue, a problem, if you were to watch it maybe in the theaters. For some people it's of course subjective and it's not for everybody. It's all, and I also equate a lot of this to food. It's like you have a certain palate. Like my mother, who's grown up on Maharashtrian food, and she could not care less for Bengali food, for example. She's like, it's too sweet for me, or she doesn't like Asian food or whatever. She likes Indian food. She likes her coriander powder and her Malwani masala. So it's also a matter of palate as to what you've conditioned to watch over it. But I also feel that these other factors make a difference for sure. I'll tell you, there are films. Okay, I'll give you an example. I was in Berlin for the post-production of the film in October last year. And we went to, I won't mention the name of a film. The film, it's a internationally acclaimed, celebrated independent film last year. We bought the ticket. We said, is it in English? Because in Germany, sometimes they have English subtitles, sometimes they don't. Does this have English subtitles? Or something like that. Or we assume the film is in English. We went in, we sat for the first half an hour. We were blown away by the film. We were like, this is so good, except the film is not in English. It's in some other language and doesn't have subtitles. But like, this is so good.
Right.
So I was like, I want to go back to India and I want to try to watch the film. Okay. So 2-3 months down the line, I'm in my house and I switch off the lights, my TV and everything. And I play the film. And I'm like, shit, this looks like TV. You know,
Right.
this is so blah. This is such pedestrian filmmaking. And I had to question myself, like, how can my experience of the same film be so different, you know, in different contexts? But I do also feel that there is something inexplicable and mystical, and like I said, like a theater performance about film screenings. I don't know if it's just me, but it's that day, it's that moment, it's what kind of a day you've had, what kind of a mood you are in, also what kind of a phase you are in your life. You know, the same film, sometimes we love it and then we watch it 10 years down the line, we're like, this is
Absolutely
terrible. Or sometimes you don't care for some movies and 12 years down the line, when we have matured and we've grown up, we are like, wow, you know, I get it now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's happened to us a lot.
Please stop me if my answers are too long or if I'm being
No, we just have so many questions, and I know the audience has so many questions that I'm wondering. But I know Tenzing and I grew up watching films in, you know, cinemas, and we'd to see 5-6 films in the cinema.
This was in the Bay Area when we were students.
Right.
Berkeley, and there were amazing theaters and amazing films, and it was a whole different experience. And now, you know, if we watch the same film at home, like, you know, it's not the same. You know, I mean, you can still see it's a good film, but you don't experience it in the same way.
It's true.
There's, you know, it's a huge difference. But I feel like that's a big problem as a filmmaker now, because now everything, if you measure it in commercial success, then, you know, people don't have the attention span. People, you know, watch 5 minutes and drop off. And so that's a big problem, especially for the producer. And I know you have the most amazing producer who we care deeply about, but you know, it's quite a challenge. And is that something, you know, I mean, we should talk about it, because I know filmmakers think about this and talk about this and need to, you know, we need to address this.
No, I will take this one step further even. Okay, firstly, I should tell you that I didn't grow up watching films in the theaters.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends did, you know, whose mother initiated them into like this film watching culture. I could not, because my family could not afford it. Some of the biggest blockbusters, okay, of like even Bollywood, which I kind of grew up watching, I haven't seen them in the theaters because we just couldn't afford it. We had like a very kind, generous neighbor, you know, and they were well off. If they like took us to a film because they knew we don't go to the cinemas that often, then maybe like I remember watching 1 or 2 films because they took us to watch the film in the cinema. So I didn't actually grow up watching. But anyway, coming to this other point of people's attention spans and films, I think the problem is something else now. And this is something that I've been thinking about and observing. And because also I am like one of the biggest fans of now what's happened with storytelling, I'll tell you. And it is a problem. I don't know what kind of a problem you would define it as. But so why did people watch films? Or, you know, why did films occupy such a important place in popular culture or mainstream discourse in the 20th century? Because it's, you know, I'm talking about like not like super art house kind of films. I'm talking about films that people, you know, like a lay audience watches. It's stories, right? Now stories is a very primal need of human beings. We need stories to make meaning of life. We tell stories all the time, right? Even when we are gossiping or even when we're having conversations, we talk about stories. And of course, films is a lot more than storytelling. That's a very limited understanding of film. If you say filmmaking is films are about stories, but for most people, that's what it kind of comes down to. Now, your definition of story and the form that even the medium of film has taken has splintered into so many different mediums and ways and different lengths and different sort of forms, that people just have that many more options now to sort of get to know a story or absorb or consume a story. So a TikTok video is a story, an Instagram story is literally a story. Now people talk about memes and tweets and Facebook posts. That's what people are now collectively sort of tuned into now, like they used to be about films back in the 20th century. I myself, like I said, I'm the biggest fan of like narrative driven video games, narrative driven board games. And I play some of them and I'm like, this is the new frontier of storytelling. Because some of these mediums make you an active participant as opposed to a passive viewer. It's not always a good thing, because like when you talk, like I said, about my filmmaking, I need complete control as to how I control the attention of the viewer. And so I'm a detective case junkie. So like the thing that I have to do every week, so there are like games which are like you have to solve cases like Sherlock Holmes and things like that, and you have to do lots of paperwork. You have to like question different suspects, collate the data. But I feel so immersed.
Right.
That even like the biggest of cliches of the genre come alive because I am living them, I'm experiencing them.
Right.
And those 3 hours that I spent as a detective, no detective movie can give me that experience, because here I am in charge.
Right.
So coming back to the main point is now storytelling or what, and everybody's become a creator now. Everybody's become it's not in the hands of the custodians anymore. The dichotomy I'm kind of still struggling to grasp is then how do people binge watch 10-hour episodes, 15-hour episodes? Because that's another way of like zoning out.
Right.
So either people want something very short, it's like 5 minutes, 8 minutes, or they want something which is 8 hours, 10 hours. So where film falls in this equation now,
exactly,
a bit of a question.
No,
Again,
I think that's the big question.
Yeah.
Where do the kinds of films that we love, that the kinds of films that you're making, where is the place for that in this changed world?
Yeah, but as you can make out, I'm not really also at the same time judging the change, because
it's there. It's happening.
so many art forms did not survive the 19th century and 18th century. Nobody does plate spinning anymore. So we don't know how this is going to. But also, I'm hoping that there could be a revival of cinema watching as an event. I mean, of course, certain kind of films will then prevail, which they are already doing. But here's another perspective, okay? Again, a famous filmmaker told me this when I asked him, like, I won't give you the name of the filmmaker. I was like, our cinema, in the pandemic, I was like, our cinema is going to be dead. The movies we love watching. And he was like, they're already dead. What are you talking about? It's only some like bearded geeks with cappuccinos in their hands, 20 of them who go and watch this in like select. It's already dead. Otherwise, wake up and smell the coffee.
That's a cruel statement, but
and he was like, if that's what you're worried about, don't worry, that's going to stay.
And when we were speaking to Asif yesterday, he's also like looking at like extended reality and like really starting to think about how
explore
to work.
different ways of exactly telling stories in some sense.
I think I think we should talk about magic, because somehow in what you're saying, like magic is an essential part of it, right? I mean, the way your experience of it. So tell us about your interest in magic, and might that take you to making a film about magic? And I think
so it's interestingly, The Disciple is like a spiritual successor and adaptation of a play that I had written when I was like 20 or 21 called Grey Elephants in Denmark, which was a similar journey, a similar conflict, but about a magician. And Vivek was the magician. He was the lead, and he had to train, and we performed live effects, and we did interactive mentalism with people. But I'm not so sure about making a film on magic, because it just does not translate. It just does not translate well on, unless you're doing an expose,
Right.
where you're like taking the audience. If I'm just doing an effect, you're like, on camera or on screen, you're going to be like, yeah, on screen anything is possible.
That's right.
It's just a different experience, to experience it live, because that's kind of also the uniqueness about magic. So for example, in cinema, you get to watch a dream-like experience, or be in a dream-like state on a screen, right? What magic does is create that experience of things that could only happen in dreams in real life, in that moment. It's a totally unique, medium. Unfortunately, the medium has been trivialized in the 20th century, from the beginning of the 20th century going on in the 21st century, to such an extent that people struggle to take it seriously. The idea of magic is, okay, you go for a birthday, come for a birthday party, or show it to my kid, or, oh yeah, whatever. Or it's like camera trickery. Now it's like, oh, camera tricks on TV or whatever. It's the most beautiful, most unique art form. It's the only art form dedicated solely to the emotion of wonder and pure astonishment. It's the feeling that that a human being had when he or she first saw the solar eclipse.
Right.
Right. And yes, I'm very passionate about the subject, not as a performer, but more as a observer, as a student. I do perform. You can't understand it till you don't perform it. And I've had some definitive moments in my life where I got to experience some of the best magic that exists in the world, and it changed my life. It blew my mind, and I can't describe it in words. You can't see it on video. You have to experience it. Okay, I'll give you an example also. Like, the day I finished The Disciple, my last day on The Disciple was in a village called Manikpara in West Bengal. I came back and I was on my way to Blackpool for the Blackpool Magic Convention. The next day I took a flight, because that's how I maintain my sanity. Okay? And it's really helped me, not become a totally depressed person and go totally senile. And it's a hobby that I'll cherish for life. But it's taught me so much about human psychology. It's taught me so much about being a choreographer of expectations. It's taught me so much about personality, and all these things apply to cinema. It's taught me so much about communicating to the subconscious of the viewer rather than the conscious. It's taught me so much about why it's not so much about what people hear or what they see. It's so much more about what they feel in their gut. That's what I learned from the Spanish School of Magic. And I'll tell you through one example how I use this in my filmmaking. I told you about the VFX and stuff. That's all magic. And I feel even if filmmakers don't classify it as magic, they're all doing magic. They're all illusions. 100%. And I can give you countless examples of other films where I'm like, this is magic. What is this if not magic? And we all know that magicians were the one, like Lumiere brothers did magic, and George Méliès did magic, and Satyajit Ray was very fond of magic, and Dadasaheb Phalke did street shows as a magician. So, for example, what we call wala, the crowd does when we hear the murmurs of people in a scene, like when we're doing sound like ba 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 ba, which you don't hear in a restaurant or cafe or whatever.
Right.
Now, I direct every single one of those walas. We get real actors, real people, non-professional actors, and I direct every single wala, every single piece of dialogue, give them a situation, do 3 takes, 4 takes. And now there are going to be like 200 of them layered. Right? At the same time, and it's going to be the last thing that anybody's going to hear, because they are going to hear the dialogue that the characters are saying. And the person who's operating order, they're like, why are you doing this? This is never going to be processed by the human mind. It's never going to be registered. And I have this belief that subconsciously it's going to make a difference.
Right.
I have this belief that every detail is going to translate. Not for everybody. If you don't care fundamentally about the film or its conflict or the characters, you're not going to care about anything else. Okay. But for those, it might work because it's all subjective. Magic, not everybody likes magic. Not everybody laughs at the same jokes. Similarly with films. But even in my, during my grading process, during my sound mixing process, I found myself so many times calculating and thinking like from the perspective of magic as to, because what magicians do is they get into the minds of the viewer, the spectator, not even the viewer. There you're a participant because it's between two people. And they are one step ahead because they know how the participant is going to feel and think, and that's what they hack. And so much of it is non-verbal communication. So that kind of seeps into my direction to actors as to how can we let the camera intuit your inner world more than what you're saying. It also guides this idea of granting intuition and intelligence to the viewer, to the spectator. And then also in all your details, all the little, like, I'm not trying to show off or saying that's the only way to do it, but every single cough that you hear in the film, every single phone ring, sneeze, it's all placed. Because one cough, in a conference hall, puts you in that conference hall. You don't even register it, but that's what happens. And it's also part of rhythm. It's also part of music, for me. So same with like background actors, design. You want those little imperfections. You want those little touches that make it all very, very convincing. And that's kind of also what people misunderstand to be realism. Oh, it's so there is no such thing as realism.
Right.
It's coming more from that. So these long takes, this concept of time, working with non-actors, it's all for me like kind of grounded in this idea of whether the illusion works for me or not as a viewer.
Is it connected in some way to spirituality? Is it spiritual in some way or not at all?
Not, look, when I'm writing a script in my sort of philosophical ponderings and when I'm trying to find answers, but that's a very different process. The rest of the filmmaking part is a very practical, very physical process where you're working with many different people, you're fighting against time. So not really, but yes, in the scripting process, but that's again more on a philosophical level as to, because you're trying to find answers through your story for yourself as well,
You've described all the detail you go into. So how are you with the team? Like, what is it like working with you? I know some of the people who worked on your film. I haven't talked to them in any depth at all, but I'm just interested because it just sounds completely crazy.
It is crazy. It is not easy on them, but you have to understand it's nuanced. It's a nuanced issue. The thing is, when you're working in a city like Mumbai, with like Mumbai film professionals, they have a certain way of working. They have a certain style of working also because that's the kind of work that's happening here. So for them, it's a bigger shift in their mindset to work on a film like this. Because they have to completely sort of unlearn and switch off. And it's not because I have some revolutionary method, because that's the only way I know how to make things, because I haven't been on a Bombay film set. You know what I mean? And also the pace of, you can't make a film like this in a rush or, in a hurry. You have to make it in a certain way. So that's one element, The other thing is, if you know your job, if you know your work, if you know you have your expertise, you will be much more open, and it will be much easier for you to execute those instructions or those directions about the details. And they will naturally be a part of your work ethic. They'll naturally be applying that. Like, for example, the mixing engineer, he was a mind reader. I would tell him, okay, this is what I want it to be. And he would execute it exactly like that. My color is to did code and the disciple. We didn't have to ever argue even once, or there was never this. It would be like, this is what we want you to do, or this is what we think we have in mind. And then he would do it and even better. And you'd be like, that's amazing, man. Now, the third aspect is, are you getting paid for your time? That's where independent cinema struggles, right? I
Right.
want you to, I want you to do, like, you're a sound designer. I want you to work for 6 months on this film. We did our sound design for almost like 9 months. Okay. And it was the laughing stock of Bombay Sound Studios. Like, who are these people? Why are these guys working for 9 months on sound? There are like certain scenes where like the protagonist is running and I had some idea. We've done Foley 5 times for that scene. Luckily, Vivek does not question me, why are you doing this 5 times? Somebody else would. Okay, so you are doing sound design for 9 months. Now there are two problems. A, you need to have the budget to pay them for their 9 months, their market rate, which have been now inflated by all the OTTs because of the series and everything and the kind of crazy money that's going at people. The other problem is, in those 9 months, because generally they would finish a film in say 2 months, 3 months, they are turning down 2 or 3 other projects. Now it's not just about them turning down those projects, it's about them pissing off those production houses who do more than one film a year. So these are the more practical problems that you also have to face when you have such a romantic idea of working. And that's why it's very hard to then find good professionals, because they're all so busy. Because you're going to make one film in 3 or 4 years. Such a film is not made, every year, because nobody has that kind of resources to make. I mean, this is really an expensive film and a very indulgent process. And again, I only have Vivek to thank for it, and my stars to thank for it. So it's just, and then you're like, okay, this is a great professional, but he's only going to give you a month or 2 months. Even with the best of professionals, if you have like unrealistically limited time, you can't achieve much, because then you're just trying to cover the basics. So these are the more practical problems that one also has to account for and face. It's not, so easy to do all of this. But yeah, we survived it, I guess, in some way. And again, it will still be a totally boring and, blah film for many people, and it will work for some people. So
Yeah, you just touched a little bit more again on the role of the producer,
yeah,
in the sense that, like, you're lucky that you have someone like Vivek who totally trusts you and
yeah.
sort of he's there for you, not questioning you in any way. I mean, most filmmakers are not so lucky, right? But how important has that relationship been for you in your filmmaking? And I mean, do you see that as something that's vital in the future?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. Like I always say this, that the films exist because of Vivek and I exist because of him. Everything that even I'm saying right now, or what I've been able to learn, it's all like a ripple effect, because he decided to trust me when I was 24. With helping me and enabling me to write the script, of course, right from there. And no, absolutely none of this would exist, and none of this I would be able to say if I couldn't execute it. And we wouldn't be having this conversation if not for Vivek. And it's also like it's not like he doesn't care about his money or he doesn't question anything, but he has the trust and he has the faith that not just me, the entire team is responsible when it comes to like spending the money, and is also doing it with the right intent. We are not spending that money on the shoes or the wardrobe of some celebrity. We are
Right.
spending the money to make the film better. In fact, I must tell you, there are so many times where, while during making the film, we had so many times where I was like, Vivek, we don't need this. It's fine. It's okay. We can. He's like, no, but it's going to make it better, right? Be honest. I'm like, yeah, of course. He's like, let's do it.
Right. Right.
So honestly, sometimes I have to be the producer and be like, Vivek, this is crazy. We can't be doing this, you know. But it's also this innate need for the film. That's the thing for both of us. If we see a way to that in which the film is going to be better, we have to try it out. We have to at least try it out.
That's an amazing partnership, and
I mean,
long may it continue.
Yeah, really.
I hope so too, because I don't know how else I'll be able to do anything, because that's kind of the foundation of the that's how you get the effect for whoever it works.
Right.
You start taking things out, elements out piecemeal, it's not going to be the same thing.
Yeah. I think at this point, we have so many questions. So maybe we should go to the Q&As because I think there are a lot of them. But thank you. That was really that's amazing. I mean, we could go on for hours, but
I know.
Let's go to some of these Q&As.
Okay, so I'll start with Akash Rohilla. Says, hi Chaitanya, do you storyboard your films? Coming from someone who didn't go to film school and doesn't have sketching drawing skills, sometimes you have a scene in mind, but you can't communicate it to the actors. How do you find that missing something?
Right. So thank you, Akash, for that question. So when I was starting out, when you haven't lived your process, when you haven't found your process, you're like, oh, should I storyboard? Because I've heard and seen that people do storyboard. I tried it. I tried it with my short film, Sixth and that. Then I realized that the kind of situation and the context that we work in independent cinema, we don't have that kind of control. We are not building sets. It's not absolutely like things are changing, locations are changing, dates are changing, time can be limited. So it doesn't really make sense unless you have a very complicated action sequence or a very complicated VFX sequence. To me, it doesn't make sense to storyboard. Secondly, for me, it's very boring also. Like, one of the big things for me with all the processes is to be present in the moment, so it's nerve-wracking, but I take also at the same time great joy in just landing up on set and deciding on that day, depending on how you're feeling in that moment, what you want to do. Because you have to be present to the light that day, to how the location is now looking now that the production design is done, how you're blocking the scene with the actors, what they are comfortable with. So for me, that's very important, to be present in the moment, and I don't storyboard basically, and that's the reason why.
Okay. Tathagata Ghosh, who I know is a filmmaker, he says, you had a day job for a long time writing for TV, and you have said you had to do stuff you didn't like. For someone who is going through the same but wants to make films without having the worry to pay her bills, what will you say to that, and how to go about that?
uh, well, that's the answer that I'm trying to find myself. That's the answer everybody's trying to find. No, I did it for 1 year, and I was too young. I was too open. Like, I was 17, and I took it like a challenge. I was like, okay, so this is what makes people laugh. This is what they want. I'll give it to them. I had that kind of naive energy and, cockiness. Like, okay, I'll do it. And so that, but in my case, what happened was something very interesting happened. A really horrible, terrible incident happened. I haven't really gone into the details of this anywhere, but somebody who was like my senior or my boss got really insecure because I was kind of rising through the ranks and I became indispensable. He did something really horrible, to break my confidence and to make me feel insecure. And it's crazy. It's crazy. I don't even know if I've ever spoken about this, but he did something really, really horrible. And that pissed me off, so bad, that made me so angry that I decided to give up this great opportunity I had. I decided to give up all this money that I was earning, good money for that age, for that time. Decided to give up all of it. And that incident kind of pushed me to do my own work. I would have probably not done it. I would have probably been there for another 2-3 years because it's a comforting position to make that kind of money when you're so young. But that kind of really riled me and motivated me to start doing my own work. Again, another answer is I could say that, yeah, you need to find your Vivek Tathagat, you need to find your Vivek. But you need to understand that even Vivek, I met him and then he didn't work with me. He didn't say, okay, I'll produce your film the first day we met. I had a whole journey before meeting him. I have had a journey after meeting him, and he's seen that journey. There are many like sort of mistakes I've committed. There are many messes I've been in, which people don't know about. Which people, I haven't spoken about those things, but I've been in Bombay and I've been doing my own work since I was 19, and the kind of rejections I've faced, the kind of humiliation I've faced, it's taught me a lot of things, and that kind of also gives you a certain kind of resilience, a certain kind of confidence, and a certain kind of attitude where you're not ready to take bullshit from others, no matter who. So so I think Vivek saw that, but that didn't happen overnight. It's been a process, it's been a journey. But yes, having said all of that, you need to be lucky to find collaborators like a Vivek Gomber or a Pooja Talreja, to do what you're doing.
Okay. There was one question here. Sorry.
They've got it right in the front.
Okay, so it's Alok Adhikari. He's asking, can you talk about what it means to be a choreographer of expectations as a filmmaker? I think he's using the term that you used.
Yes. Now, choreographer of expectations is something I have learned from the Spanish School of Magic. So there are some mind-blowing close-up magicians in Spain, like Juan Tamariz, like Danida Ortiz, uh, who I've seen their magic live more than once, and it's changed my life. It's like, and it's a radical philosophy of close-up magic where you really kind of hack into the, you don't think of it from the magician's ego or from the magician's perspective. You think of it from the audience's perspective. And a lot of that philosophy is not about one effect, is when they do a 2-hour session or a 1-hour session with somebody, how do you structure that 1 hour? The highs and the lows, the peaks and the valleys. And they're constantly thinking of what kind of an expectation I am creating in the mind of the viewer, and then exceeding those expectations. And also it's very complicated, because it's like you can't always be on like a 9 out of 10 with everything. You can't always be at an 8 out of 10. You have to take it to 3, then you have to take it to 8, then you have to because surprise is a big part of it. So I'll give you, okay, people have seen Court, okay, even if they haven't seen The Disciple. Now with Court, I was also inspired by Bong Joon-ho's filmmaking and his storytelling. It starts off as a typical courtroom drama. There is a victim, there are 2 lawyers fighting for justice, there is a court, there is questioning. And then at the 40th minute, something happens which I hadn't seen in other films, in other courtroom dramas. You start going into the lives of the public prosecutor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't want to spoil anything about The Disciple, but you see what happens in the 2nd chapter of the film, the first scene, that it's set up like a classic coming of age film. All the tropes of then, the archetype of this artist's journey. And then you see it suddenly goes in another direction, So that's what I mean by being a choreographer of expectation. I'm not saying I'm any good at it, but I'm trying.
I think Alok was from Film South Asia. So I think
Hi,
it's
Alok.
Nepal. And after that, I really want to go and do a magic session. I need to do this now.
Yeah.
Like
We
you
have to
sold
do
us.
this in person. We have to do this in person.
We need that kind of inspiration ourselves. So this is an anonymous attendee. He says, hey Chaitanya, can you share your most effective writing resources and tools that were of aid when you were crafting Court?
Yeah. Now this is a thing, the writing process for me is the most torturous, painful process, especially like after I'm done with the research. The research part is an absolute joy. After that, it's just the most painful, most torturous process where I'm depressed, I'm full of self-doubt, I'm full of guilt, and I'm on the verge of giving up. I literally like weep tears of blood when I'm trying to write. Okay, which also means the fear of failure is, riding high in my mind. And I'm a master procrastinator. I procrastinate as much, and I try every single gimmick in the book to not write, but also at the same time try to write. Okay, so this is a technical question. I would categorize this as a technical question. I'll tell you what I use for my writing process. Okay, so Evernote for me is indispensable. I use Evernote, which is like for note making. I have lots of notebooks, all my ideas go, and it syncs across all your devices. It's a virtual. I use a software called Q10, and I think now I have Focus Writer, depending on your platform, which is just free writing, a black screen. It has the sounds of a typewriter, and including that chung when you press enter and chuk 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 of the keys. No autocorrect, no formatting, just free writing. I do a lot of free writing before I start writing the script. It's like me thinking on paper. I do a lot of free writing, which nobody ever gets to see. So I use that. I have something known as free write, which is a physical, portable mechanical keyboard, but which syncs to the Wi-Fi. So I have that physical keyboard typewriter with me. All of these are just like ways to buy time. Okay. Then I use a software called Movie Outline, which is to like outline my story, which is an indispensable tool. When I have scenes, I start like ordering them, blah, blah, blah. Of course, Final Draft for the final screenplay. Then I also use a corkboard and index cards, lots of index cards. Yeah. And then a corkboard, and I place those index cards on the corkboard because I want to see them physically. Yeah. And then I start moving things around. I also use mind mapping sometimes, okay, physically on a software. This is just me struggling, really struggling to committing to writing the script. And now these days, okay, I have one here. Okay, it's got an idea. I found, can you see this? Okay, so my handwriting is very bad. So these are like statically charged notes, which I have on my wall. I've removed them, but they just stick to any surface. So now I've started using them because I want to see it on my wall, like my different ideas, and you can move them around. So yeah, I use a lot of softwares to write.
Who would have thought? So this is a question that has quite a few upvotes. So it's from Prasanna Kundapur. Did the involvement of Alfonso Cuarón change the way you worked with the technicals as compared to when you worked on court? If yes, which technicals?
I don't understand exactly what Prasanna means by technicals here. Do you mean like the technical aspects, or do you mean the technicians?
Okay, maybe he'll send
yeah,
us.
maybe you can clarify and we can answer that.
So meanwhile, let's go to one other question, which is, well, this is a quick one. Where can we stream The Disciple? Is it coming on any OTT soon, or is it going to be screened in any virtual film fest? Not being screened at DIFF is very sad. And any Indian film fest.
Yeah, so the short answer is that yes, it will be most likely coming on an OTT. I don't know if it's coming out soon, but we are on the verge of finalizing an OTT deal. So it will definitely, it's not coming to a virtual film festival in India because of piracy concerns. Please understand, people think that we are snobbish, or why is it not available in India? Why is it geo-blocked at festivals? Try investing your money, try investing 4 years of your life, and then putting it online for somebody to just rip it and share it with people. It's not a nice feeling. Please understand, piracy is a real concern, more for independent films, sadly, than for mainstream films. Also, maybe, just maybe, it might also have some kind of a very limited theatrical release, but that's like not confirmed as of yet. But the OTT part, I can tell you definitely that's happening next year.
Great. Okay, so Gokul KS asks, Chaitanya, thanks for the talk. Great listening to you. I'm just curious to know about your inspirations. The directors, sorry, it just disappeared from my screen. Is it up? Okay. The directors and films in world cinema you admire. Can you explain a little bit about how your love for world cinema influences your filmmaking process?
Yeah, I mean, it's world cinema that kind of made me decide that I want to go into filmmaking and I want to become a director. City of God was that one film that changed it for me. That's when like this can of worms opened and I was like, shit, and there was a time in life for like about 2 years, like when people ask me, what do you do? I used to say, I watch world cinema. That was my identity, So yeah, I have varied influences. The thing is, you kind of have certain heroes and then you kind of grow out of them. Your heroes die. And then some years later, you again realize why you used to like them. So varied influences. If you asked me 3-4 years ago, I wouldn't have divulged those names because I feel like it's a lot of irresponsible name throwing. Like, who am I to throw names of such big filmmakers? But anyway, so Kiarostami personally for me is a god of filmmaking. I was lucky enough to do a workshop with him, which didn't go down that well for me, but yeah, I met him. Haneke is a big influence, and all of this comes from Bressa, obviously. And again, there are more like films that I'm inspired by rather than the entire filmography of a filmmaker. If you ask me like who are filmmakers who I consider to be geniuses, that would be Fellini and Kubrick and Chaplin and Buster Keaton. These are like, I think, geniuses, you know, and Tarkovsky. But yeah, I mean, I'm personally influenced by Roy Anderson. I'm influenced by Jia Zankar's Platform. I'm influenced by Apichatpong Veerasetokul. I absolutely love his work. I'm inspired also by some of Ulrich Seidel's work. So yeah, many different influences. But yeah.
Great. Okay, so Prasanna meant technicians and the technical treatment, he says.
Sure. So that's the thing, you know, you realize when you see a master like Alfonso at work, you kind of realize that there is no such thing as technical necessarily. It's all about your vision and the people you're working with. You know, they're your collaborators. They're not just technicians, but technique is an important part, of your skill set and your toolbox to be able to execute that vision that you have. You know, and yeah, what I learned from Alfonso, I thought I'm pretty detail oriented. You know, I thought I'm a control freak till I saw him. And I was like, shit. You know, I was blown away by the kind of control he has and the kind of eye for detail he has. So yeah, I just basically became more confident about the specifics and the different moving parts of each department. I became more sensitized, to different aspects of sound, of editing, of VFX that I wasn't. And then I also learned to demand more, you know, to ask for more.
Are we running out of time?
No, I think we're fine.
Are you okay? There's a lot of questions. I don't think we're going to be able to go through them all. But quickly, one is from an anonymous attendee saying, how did you choose your cinematographer? Did you happen to work with him earlier?
Right. So I actually, you know, faced a lot of issues trying to look for a cinematographer because I knew that the texture of this film is very different, from court, and it has to visually look different. So I was looking for something. And the thing again in India is a lot of the top DPs are booked for 8 months, 9 months. You know, even if they are not, it's not the kind of film where a DP can come in and shoot for 2 months and then go. You would need to prep a lot. You would need to commit at least 6 months, 7 months, and we can't pay that kind of money anyway. So I started looking for a lot of international DOPs. I had a lot of conversations, and it wasn't working out. Maybe because people were racist, they didn't take an Indian film seriously. Maybe our budget wasn't big enough for them. Maybe people didn't want to come to Bombay, or just there's just too much work happening. I don't know. It wasn't really working out, and I was very frustrated. I must have spoken to at least like 30 DPs for this film, and I told Alfonso, listen, and I actually harassed Alfonso and his entire team because I was in London for the sound mix of Roma, and I was like, I'm looking for a DP, okay? And everybody was trying, it wasn't working out. And then Alfonso wrote to Emmanuel Lubezki, the great DP, Chivo, and he asked him for a DP recommendation, and he recommended, Michał Sobocinski to him. And luckily, Michał was in Bombay, because he had shot a lot in Bombay. So when I called him, within 2 hours, he was going to Ajanta, Ellora, and he was on a boat, and he came back because he was staying at Taj Langan to meet me in 2 hours. I was like, how cool is this that a guy from Poland happens to be in Mumbai and he's meeting me in like 2 hours. But he'd worked a lot in Mumbai. He'd seen the slums, he'd seen the skyscrapers, he'd shot commercials, and he understood the light of Mumbai. And also he had the kind of spirit and the drive and the hunger to do good work, because he'd done a lot of big films in Poland, but they were all like mainly commercial films. So he wanted to do something like this. And luckily it all worked out, and I think he's done a fantastic job in the film.
Yeah,
He certainly has.
Okay. Astik A says, hi, how do you find a cast or create a communal experience throughout? For people who are not from primarily film school backgrounds, how do you go about casting actors and keeping them with motivation, keeping them motivated to your vision?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I genuinely believe that filmmaking or film is a social project, and given the kind of films that, Court and The Disciple have been, that was absolutely true. And that process of making it a community project or giving that experience to people is a very intrinsic part of how we go about it. So even when we are conducting auditions, even when we are casting for the film, the casting team is trained to go out of their way to make people feel comfortable. There is not a very professional vibe when they come in. We do it in like, community spaces or someone's grandmother's 100-year-old house, or we set up our office in a certain way where people don't even feel like, oh, they are being, judged here. And they anyway don't have a concept of what these processes are supposed to be. Okay. So that's the first part. So we do auditions in a very humane, very kind way. We talk to them for half an hour, sometimes an hour. We get to know their story. There's a very and people are trained to behave in a certain way, which is very warm and very open. So even when we come on set, we've like called uncles and aunties and my mom's friends and someone's relative, and we've pulled favors to get faces, get people on set. So we have to make sure there's great food. We have to make sure that their resting areas are clean and air conditioned. And we have dedicated people to entertain them while they are waiting to shoot. So all of that has to be, kept in mind. And then even when I talk to them on the mic, I'm very friendly. It's like a performance. I'm constantly cracking jokes. I'm very friendly. I have to, because of court, some people knew me, so I had to do like photo sessions and whatever after wrapping up the day and all. But yeah, we go out of our way because even the primary cast is non-actors. So it's most important that for you to get good performances, you need to create an atmosphere on set for people to trust you and trust you enough to fail a few times and then you know get there. And not just me and my direction team or the casting team, the entire crew is performing for them. Everybody is instructed. Nobody is to raise their voices, nobody is to yell, nobody is to like fight in front of the people the minute. And I mean, all background actors for us are actors. The minute they are on set, we have to be at our best behavior, because if we create an environment of stress, they will get nervous and it will show on camera. So that's the process.
Okay. Sorry. So I'm just wondering, are we?
Yes, yeah, we are
okay.
going. We are going.
So Vihari M asks, how do you structure story material that you have?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a process. I mean, there's no easy answer to it. Also, because interestingly, both my films, I had a rough structure in mind, but I just could not do it like a professional screenwriter where they have everything outlined and then they start writing the film. I just can't get myself to do that. So I basically ended up writing both the films like a novel, where I approach one scene a day and then I don't know what the next scene is going to be the next day. Again, don't get me wrong, I've done a lot of prep. I have a lot of ideas. I have all the different pieces, the scenes, but then sometimes I just don't have the answers. So, for example, with The Disciple, I didn't know what the last scene is going to be till like 5 a.m. that morning. I finished the script at 6 a.m. Till 5 a.m., I didn't know what the last scene is going to be. So, it's a bit like taking a plunge, diving into the deep end, and then hoping to find the answers. And that's the process that works for me rather than getting everything right and then starting to write the script.
Great. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So once you've written that script, then you go into the edit. How much did you change in the edit?
No, not much, to be honest. In both my films, it's what the script is what the film is. Of course, elimination always helps. So maybe a couple of shots go out, or maybe a scene goes out. But that didn't happen with The Disciple. With Code, we took out one scene, but there's no like playing around and changing things and changing. It's what the script is basically.
So here's another question. How did you write scenes for the film Court? Do you sit with the people who are facing the same conflict, or do you study these kinds of incidents from newspapers or books and adapt from books?
So again, I believe that, again, this is my belief. I could be wrong about this. I believe that ideas have to stem from your subconscious. That's what I'm saying. When I sit to write, I don't know what I'm going to write, but something's in my subconscious and it just comes through, and it's a magical process for me as well. But how do I develop a subconscious about Indian judiciary or courtrooms? Because I have no relationship with Indian, I don't have any memories of courtroom. How do I develop a relationship with the world of Indian classical music? It's not my world, you know. So what I believe in doing, or what I try to do, is immerse myself without an agenda, immerse myself without any judgment into these worlds. And then I'm reading books, I'm watching documentaries, doing everything that you mentioned, developing rapport with people, talking to people without any agenda. I mean, of course, I get ideas. Okay, this is interesting, I write it down. Okay, this is interesting, I write it down. But what I'm mainly trying to do is let it all, get absorbed, and I'm forming a subconscious of sort. That's what I believe in. It might not be true scientifically and psychologically. Yeah, I am forming a subconscious. So there are, I mean, I'm telling again. So for example, the whole third chapter of the Disciple, like the resolution of sort, I spent 6 or 8 months trying to find it out, and I just didn't have it. I didn't. Because somebody else asked about how do I end the story, or whatever. I just didn't have it, you know. And I had done one random visit in Delhi to somebody's house, and both me and my research collaborator were like, yeah, this was a useless meeting. This didn't help. And I said, you know what, you never know what can become useful or what can become important at what point. So let's not judge anything. It was a good meeting, but at that point it felt like it was a very futile kind of a meeting we had. But that meeting and that person's story popped into my head while I was trying to write the end, and that became the ending of the film. So you don't know which idea is going to be useful where. It's a bit like going fishing.
Okay, so I really connected with the pacing of the film and also the film. I'm not sure if he means Court or The Disciple. I would like to ask a question regarding your seeming reluctance to include a distinct connection with the city that Bombay is or Mumbai is. Somehow it felt more like Pune. Even the indoor spaces were not reflective of Mumbai as a city. Would you like to elaborate your choices in this regard?
Which film is he talking
I
about?
think he's talking about The Disciple.
Disciple, I would think.
Right.
We can.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe they can let us know.
Anyway, the answer to that is very simple. Mumbai is a very integral part of that film, and that was, but it's set also in a different period. There are 3 different time periods. There's 2006, which Mumbai was very different, and there was 2018, and then there's 2022, and there's also the early 90s. So I'm sorry if it felt like Pune to you. In either of the films, it's supposed to be Mumbai.
Okay.
But also understand, Mumbai is not one city. Mumbai means different things to different people. It's a chameleon. So.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be our last question.
This is our last question. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to pick
I think this person's asked a question before.
Yeah,
Maybe this person
this
who has
one,
not asked a question.
Okay. So Akash Basu Matari. So theater experience is like shooting or photographing using the viewfinder, and TV, laptop, mobiles are like shooting using the LCD screen. One is totally isolated and the other one is like the screen is a small part of your ambience. What do you feel?
Well, I don't know now. I mean, yes, there are 2 different experiences. That's a fact that there are 2 different experiences. But again, I don't see much point in judging it. It's not about them being mutually exclusive. It's about how can they coexist. And we need different tools for different jobs, and we need different screen sizes for different experiences. So as long as they coexist, as long as the theater experience doesn't go away, and of course we need something to unwind, and we need sometimes to zone out and watch stuff I do it all the time, after a long day or a busy day. But if that's going to threaten the very existence of theaters, that's what scares me.
So with that, yeah.
Well, do you want to, I mean, this is the typical last question. Anything about your next project? Is there anything you want to share about your next project?
It's a little early, because what ends up happening in my case, it becomes a very long commitment. But yes, I am toying with certain ideas, which are rather unconventional in their form and the medium and stuff like that. So I'm pitching it to a few people. Very excited. It's very contemporary, very modern kind of ideas. Let's see. I mean, too soon to talk about them, but I have some ideas, and I'm let's see who bites.
Good. Well, good luck. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And I think we should let the audience know that, we're going to have at 6:30 p.m. every day, there is a live. So there's a live tomorrow.
Yeah. But first, a big thank you to Chaitanya and for being so patient. You took so many questions. It
No,
was
it's such
really
a pleasure. It's like being with friends, and it's
Absolutely.
also time you get to talk about things that you don't get to talk about in other Q&As or interviews. So it's just such a pleasure and such a joy for me as well. So thank you for inviting me to do this.
Not at all.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And
And all the best for the Disciple and for your
Thank you.
future projects.
next project. And we hope to see you here for
Next
the
year.
10th edition of DIFF.
Yes, yes. Fingers
In
crossed.
person with Vivek.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so thank you, audience, for your wonderful participation and for all the questions you asked. And sorry if we couldn't kind of get through all of them. Just wanted to remind all of you that every evening at 6:30 we have the DIFF live talks, and tomorrow we have a fascinating discussion, breaking through indie filmmaking in South Asia. It's going to be moderated by producer director Srihari Sathe, and he's going to be in conversation with Afia Nathaniel from Pakistan, Deepak Ronia from Nepal, Gitu Mohandas from India, Mustafa Sarwar Faruqi from Bangladesh, and Tashi Gensen from Bhutan. All very good filmmakers, all up and coming. More than up and coming. They all established, amazing filmmakers. So please tune in for that. Thank you all again, and good night.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.